Okay, Dad, back again in my house.
I know, I'm so busy. I'm up in London all the time. It's happening.
So I was looking online recently, and I see you've done a fair bit of, or a little bit of work with for Vogue. Just wanted to explore that a little bit. It's quite a prestigious magazine. So
Yeah, I think it's a good barometer of whether you're the real deal,
okay,
frankly.
so what does working for Vogue mean for you?
It meant everything. I mean, basically, when I first contemplated being a photographer, before, probably before I went to art college even, I used to buy copies of Vogue and stuff. Maybe maybe because I like the pretty ladies. But basically, I'd sort of go into Smith's and I'd look at the photography, and the photography was amazing. You'd have Nick Knight and people like that, brilliant photographers, and it was kind of virtuoso photography that inspired these fashion magazines. But Vogue was the pinnacle, and I remember at the masthead of Vogue, the picture editor was Isabella Kuhlman, and I
Right.
remember thinking one day I might meet her, and who knows, she might give me a job. And then as soon as I came to London, and we talked about it, me and my friends like Howell, who I've talked about, it was the ultimate, and we'd sort of talk about going and seeing her, but then we realized that you don't get to see her. What actually happens is you
She's
drop.
finds you.
No, yeah, kind of, or you drop your portfolio off at Vogue House, which just closed recently. Grant Scott's done a brilliant book all about the history of Vogue House and all the titles, most notably Vogue, but also Tatler and World of Interiors, all these great magazines that were made there. But you drop your portfolio at this very imposing building, and you'd have no idea whether anyone even looked at it. Howell and I did think it would be possible to sort of put a hair in your portfolio or put a piece of paper in just to check that someone had actually looked at the folio.
What? So you'll get it back, and
You'd
then
get
if
it back
it's
and
if
you
the
would,
hair's not there,
yeah, they didn't deign to tell you whether you were any good. What you hoped would happen is you drop the portfolio off and then you'd get a phone call
yeah,
and they'd say, "Why, my God, this work is brilliant. We have to give you a commission." But
yeah,
and I did try that and nothing happened. And then what eventually happened is Justine Picardy, who was the editor at The Observer and a friend and a brilliant advocate for me, somebody who believed in me, gave me loads of amazing commissions through Jenny Ricketts, the picture editor. She sort of, I guess, went up and ended up working as a features editor for Vogue, and she basically thought, well,
she was your in.
I want my guy at Vogue, and so I got my meeting with Isabella Kuhlman,
Ah,
and it was in April 1999, and we checked the diary 6 days after the birth of little Fred.
yeah, baby Fred was born.
Exactly.
Cool. So you had your meeting with Coleman.
Yeah, and then 6 days later, I got a commission, and it just shows the value of having somebody on the inside to advocate for you and say, this guy's good, I want to work with this guy. And I got a commission with Stephen Daldry, who had just directed Billy Elliot, and so was a big deal. I mean, anybody you're going to get to photograph for Vogue is going to be a big deal. So I photographed him, and I managed to do a pretty good job. A variety of different techniques were used, but I remember doing a lot of 35mm. And then the next job was a kind of poison chalice, because they asked me to do Donatella Versace,
Oh,
and sort of, which superficially sounds brilliant, Donatella
I mean,
Versace for
Vogue
Vogue.
and Versace. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
mean.
but it was a nightmare because basically it wasn't like I was Mario Testino and I was going to get her in a studio and I was going to be directing her and it was a portrait. I was just told to go to the Versace shop, and sort of she would come down the stairs and walk around and I would photograph her, but I wasn't to give her any direction or even talk to her.
And
So
is that standard? Is that normal?
it doesn't sound very normal, does
No,
it?
like I
But
don't know how Vogue runs it, but
yeah, I mean, I think I sort of drew a veil over those pictures. I mean, I think they were fine. I think they got published and everything, but it wasn't an opportunity for me to shine.
so I know you did some more work for Vogue after this shoot.
Yeah, so the
So I guess it was good enough, the Versace
yeah, I mean,
pictures.
the shoot that followed was an interesting one, and one that we can go into a bit more detail. So it was Nobu at the Metropolitan Hotel,
Wow.
and that was sort of in the summer of 1999. So
Well, Nobu's huge now, so I'd love to
absolutely.
explore that one.
So he basically opened this chain of restaurants, and Robert De Niro had been his partner. I mean, now they've got over 50 restaurants all around the world and hotels and so on. But this was sort of in its inchoate stage. It was just a sort of embryonic thing. And
Right.
so it was very, very stylish. It was the place that people went to as well.
I think it still, in a way, is. Like, you hear Nobu is kind of the epitome of success when it comes to restaurants in London.
Yeah, it was.
People flexing it on
It was
social
a
media.
really good example of how people treat you differently if you're working for a really good magazine. So most of the time, quite often, pictures that I've got that have become quite iconic and famous were taken for quite modest publications, and I've managed
Sunday
to sort
Times,
of, yeah, I mean,
Guardian.
or maybe Sunday Times is quite famous, but I'm quite embarrassed to say, I worked for the Mail on Sunday. Say, they paid quite well, and they gave me access to somebody that I wanted to photograph. So I don't really talk about who I shot it for, because I don't really read the Mail.
Okay, so that's why you're a bit embarrassed, because you don't read it.
Yeah, I don't read the Mail. I guess it's sort of not politically aligned with where I'm at either. But, quite often you forget about who you took it for. All that matters is the photograph. And the picture of Nobu was an example where, I mean, he was really great, but maybe it was because I was doing him for Vogue, because the picture editor came along, and we started out with sort of reportage in the kitchen, sort of screwing around with his sashimi and the various sort of things that he conjures together to make this amazing sushi. And then I sort of I spotted this amazing sort of flower arrangement, incredibly fine, impossibly brilliant, sort of brilliantly executed kind of flower arrangement. And I used my ring flash. I sort of, because it was for Vogue and I didn't want to screw up, I wanted it to be really sharp. I went back to my trusted technique that I was using a lot at the time, which was the ring flash. And I just shot him in front of this flower, this arrangement.
Ring flash instead of natural light.
Yeah, I did do some daylight and utilized the kind of quite minimalist decor of the restaurant. As I say, it was Nobu at the Metropolitan Hotel, which is a really modern hotel. So it was very simple and very photogenic, and it worked well as a backdrop, as a sort of location, as sort of an environmental portrait. And so I sort of had the light bleeding from behind him through the windows. But the pictures that we used in Vogue were the ones with the ring flash, which were very sharp and lit very forensically by this powerful ring light.
Great. And what camera was so?
Probably my Pentax 6.7, my Fuji rangefinder, and my Hasselblad, all shooting color negative film. Illustrative of the fact that people treat you differently, because it was for Vogue. Nobu, after we finished the shoot, said to us, "You'll have to stay for lunch," which was a real perk.
Oh, private Nobu chef.
Yeah, so we
From
had
the man
this.
himself. Was he cooking?
Yeah, and he just made this amazing meal for me and Isabella, the woman that I'd sort of fantasized about sort of meeting and showing my portfolio a decade before. I was suddenly having lunch with her at Nobu, yeah, and we had this amazing meal. It was an extraordinary experience, and the wonderful thing about sushi is that you can sort of make a real pig of yourself.
Yeah, you can engorge.
And you don't feel laden down, you don't feel bloated. It just sort of feels like you've taken a healthy option.
Yeah, it's definitely healthy. Wow, so that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and so what followed from that, and a kind of quirky little postscript to that shoot, was that not long after that, I got commissioned to photograph Rick Steen, and also a wonderful
fellow chef.
Yeah, an esteemed chef, a sort of television personality, kind of a national treasure, really, down in Cornwall. And I drove down to Cornwall with my assistant, Julian. I think Julian Dodd, who's a photographer now. Shout out to Julian. And we arrived, and he was really accommodating, really lovely. So we spent a few hours there photographing him, then photographing him with his wife, photographing him with, I think, a fisherman on the quayside. And after we'd finished, I was getting a bit hungry, and he happened to ask me if I had photographed any other chefs, and obviously I told him about Jamie and Gordon Ramsay, who I photographed a
So
few
you'd
times.
photographed Gordon by this time.
Oh, I photographed all these chefs by this time.
Okay.
And then I remembered the Nobu.
And Gordon's like mentor, right?
I think Gordon was whose mentor? Marco Pierre White, of
Had
course.
you photographed him yet?
I'd photographed him around that time, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, probably actually after that I photographed Marco a few times.
Okay. Sorry, back to the story.
Yeah, so basically I said to him, I remembered the Nobu, the kind of
So he
dreamlike
asked
experience of being in the upper floors of the Metropolitan Hotel and having this meal. And I sort of said to him, oh, it was fantastic. He suggested that we stay for lunch, and we had this amazing meal. And then there was like a long, awkward pause, and I realised, and I said, I'm not in a minute suggesting that
you need to make us food.
You've been so generous with your time. I wouldn't dream of asking you for some food or anything like that. And he said, of course, you must stay for lunch. And we had this. It was actually, to be fair, it was better than the Nobu.
Really?
I mean, I think he was sort of as I'd laid down the
Competition.
gauntlet. Yeah. So he picked the wine, and we had all these different kind of seafoods, and at his recommendation, what happened to be particularly good, what was sort of catch of the day. And at the end of it, it wasn't like the Nobu thing. I was absolutely bloated. We had pudding, and I was drunk.
Filled you up.
But basically, I kind of realized that I was in no fit state. And so I had to get my assistant. I rolled down. I had a white Mercedes back then. I don't know if you remember it.
I do, actually.
And I rolled the seat down in the front seat, and I just sort of had a snooze while my assistant drove me up the M5 and the M4 back to Hackney.
Lovely. What a day.
What a day.
That wasn't the car you crashed on Christmas Day, was it?
No, that was the Peugeot 405. That's not relevant, Fred. Don't bring that up. That was a few years after that.
So, was this your final shoot with Vogue and Nobu, or did you get any more?
I think I might have got one or two more, but this is an interesting question, actually, because things did trail off, and I think it was because Justine left, so I didn't have someone there advocating for me and sort of saying we got to use Harry. And the other reason was that Condé Nast, who are the publishers of Vogue, always will try and grab your rights. So they always produce a contract giving them the copyright.
Right.
And if it was anybody else, then you wouldn't sign this contract. And I did have it said to me when I was sort of arguing the toss, well, David Bailey signed it, the implication being, well, you're not David Bailey, who do you think you are? And because I was part of that photo agency, I managed to sort of duck and dive, and I don't think I may have signed something that was giving them some degree of involvement in the future ownership of the copyright. Maybe they could use the pictures again for free, but I never signed away my copyright. But that kind of thing just makes you a little bit
difficult to work.
Yeah,
with,
it creates an inertia and makes it less easy for them to commission you. Cool. So that might have been the reason. But once you've worked for Vogue and you don't get paid very much, I mean, I think the rate was £75 a page. Wow. And maybe they covered your expenses, so it wasn't a money making.
Prestige then.
It was purely the fact you say you work for Vogue, you know, and so.
And they're probably quite good with credits though. They're like.
I think you're a lot of the time they credited the photographer. The typeface was tiny.
Really.
But they always credit you.
Yeah.
But yeah,
as small as they can get away with.
I mean, once you've done that, you've kind of you've jumped that hurdle, so you don't need to do it again.
Yeah, it's like an award in itself.
Yeah, I mean. The one thing I will say about those sorts of magazines, and I worked for Harper's Bazaar, and Justine ended up editing Harper's Bazaar, so I worked for them, and also Tatler I worked for at the same time, is you do get good people and you get a lot of time, and that means that statistically you're more likely to get a better picture. The quality of the picture you get is usually directly proportional to the amount of time you get and how you're perceived by your subject. So there are certain assumptions they're going to make about you if you turn up and you've been commissioned by Vogue,
Yeah.
and they're all good.
Great. So makes your job easier for sure.
Indeed.
So you mentioned your kind of connect in with these magazines. What do you think about it's who you know, not what you know?
I don't like. It's a bit like working with Keir Starmer at the moment. People like Boris Johnson want everybody to go, well, they're all the same. That degree of cynicism is depressing. I never went to any parties. I never cultivated any relationships. I didn't sort of cynically work out that I should be talking to that person in order for them to give me a job. I definitely wasn't shy about sort of extolling my own merit when I got the opportunity. But I strongly do believe that although, I mean, Justine liked me and everything, but it wasn't because I'm charming or good looking. It was because I made her look good, because I did good pictures.
Right.
And so I really strongly do rebut the notion, the kind of idea that it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think it's sort of a really cynical and depressing way of looking at the world. Relationships are very important, but perseverance, turning up, talent is more important.